Welcome to Lodmell & Lodmell, the nation's #1 asset protection law firm. My name is Douglas Lodmell, and in this section I'd like to talk about the International Asset Protection Trust. This tool has really become the mainstay and the core of any solid, serious asset protection plan. The reason is because of its strength and its capacity to solve the one weakness that we identified with the limited partnership, the LLCs, the domestic corporations, in fact, any domestic, meaning United States-based tool. And that's the capacity of the International Asset Protection Trust to remove the assets from the U.S. jurisdiction. So let's talk about how that works. First of all, the concept of a trust is really one of the oldest and strongest forms of asset protection ever created. And a special kind of trust, known as the spendthrift trust, is the ideal asset protection structure. A spendthrift trust is what the Rockefellers used and the Vanderbilts to pass assets to their children and grandchildren. And what spendthrift means is that the trust is drafted, and then there's provisions put into the trust that says, my children, or my grandchildren, or my great-great-great-grandchildren can only get these assets under these conditions. In other words, there are provisions that limit the access of the beneficiaries to the money. So if my child is a drug addict or he's in jail, he doesn't get his inheritance. That's a spendthrift provision. Well, until about 20 years ago, spendthrift provisions were only allowed to be used for a trust that you create for someone else. You could not create what's called a self-settled spendthrift trust. Self-settled means you created it for yourself. It just didn't exist. But in the 80s, a jurisdiction in the faraway Cook Islands, in the middle of the Pacific, created a specific statute that allowed for a self-settled spendthrift trust. And this was the very first asset protection trust. At the time, there were many U.S. legal commentators that suggested that U.S. public policy would preclude a U.S. citizen from ever using or being allowed to use this type of trust. And that was an open question 20 years ago. Today that question has been answered, settled, and the answer is very clearly it is not against U.S. public policy. How do we know? Because 13 U.S. jurisdictions have also enacted statutes on their books that allow for a self-settled spendthrift trust. These have become known as the domestic asset protection jurisdictions, and they include Nevada and Delaware and Alaska and so forth. So now we know spendthrift trust, self-settled spendthrift trust, and asset protection trusts are completely valid for U.S. citizens, taxpayers, and clients. So now how do we use it? Well, here's how we use it. We connect that self-settled spendthrift trust to the rest of your planning. The rest of the planning is what? You guessed it, your asset management limited partnership. That's what's going to hold your cash, your safe assets, your liquid assets, your investments, your stocks, your bonds, all of that. So that limited partnership is going to have a general partner, which is you or your closely held corporation, an LLC, not a corporation. And the limited partner is going to be your self-settled spendthrift trust, which is your asset protection trust. That trust, in our case, is domestic, and it is also springable, which means it can go to the faraway Cook Islands if necessary. The reason I believe in that structure is that we still have the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which says that the states shall grant full faith and credit to each other's judgments and courts. That means that a domestic asset protection trust will never, ever be as strong as a foreign asset protection trust. So we use the best of both. We make it domestic while there's no problems. It keeps the costs low and the management simple, but we make it springable to the foreign jurisdiction if we ever have to really defend it. And that makes our planning really the most ideal structure that I've ever seen, and we've been using it now for 15 years, and we have never, ever had anyone break into one of our plans. If you haven't watched the section on the limited partnership yet, I encourage you to do that, as well as on the limited liability company, and find out how you can protect risky assets and how we connect this all together to make the strongest asset protection plan possible. Hope you've enjoyed this section. Enjoy the website.